Hi, I'm Steve Nathans Kelly, editor of Streaming Media Producer. Today I had the chance to speak with Clyde Scott, director of video production at New World Symphony. Based in Miami, New World Symphony provides education and performance experience to recent graduates of top conservatories to prepare them for leadership roles in professional orchestras. Described as a laboratory for the way music is taught, presented, and experienced, for many years, NWS has provided not only residential and distance learning for talented young musicians, but has also presented an annual classical music concert series with an innovative hybrid model. Series subscribers attend concerts in NWS's unique in-the-round performance hall, while members of the local community are invited to watch live-switched, wall-cast IMAG presentations of the concerts in the park on the performance hall grounds. As director of video production, Clyde has developed a sophisticated workflow for the wall-cast presentations, incorporating a video storyboard and shooting script based on the orchestral configurations, lighting design, and musical flow of each performance, and deploying robotic cameras managed through NWS's in-house telemetrics system. Over the last few years, Clyde has been researching new camera systems in an effort to upgrade to 4K production, and also to enable a more fluid POV shooting style to capture the symphony performances more dynamically and less obtrusively. After much experimentation, in 2019, NWS chose Panasonic's UE150 4K PTZ cams and RP150 touchscreen remote camera controller as the core elements of their new production system for the 2019-20 season and beyond. Now that season, of course, came to a grinding halt when the pandemic hit in March 2020. And as the symphony transitioned to smaller ensemble performances in an empty hall, Clyde's wallcasts gave way to webcasts. In our interview, we talk about both production pivots. First, the planned adoption of the new PTZ workflow and the totally unexpected shift to streaming. Besides moving into live streaming, can you just talk a little bit about why you decided to change your workflow and change your gear setup and so forth, and sort of what the impetus was for the change?
We opened this building in January of 2011, I believe, as an HD facility, end-to-end HD facility, and a number of years into doing all of these productions and everything, the equipment started reaching its end of life, and we began researching what we were going to replace it with, and that turned into a multi-year researching into 4K and moving into a 4K infrastructure, which we ultimately did a few summers ago. Part of that whole journey when we were doing HD performances was, the system was great. We had 10 robotic cameras originally, and it was a fantastic system. I designed it. I don't have anything to there's nothing to complain about it. It was great. However, one of the things that after doing a number of shows, one of the things that we really started to get interested in is being able to show different points of view. By necessity, our concert hall is in the round. The seating is in the round, so there are audience members not only in front of the orchestra, but on the sides of the orchestra and behind the orchestra, all surrounding the stage, 360 degrees. So, and part of our whole plan originally was that we wanted to make a robotic system that never had a human operator visible on stage ever. And so we kind of placed these cameras around for aesthetic reasons, as far as the types of shots we were going to be able to get, but also for audience aesthetic reasons, like to kind of keep them out of the way of the audience and try to make them not so noticeable. And so we originally had this installation which had multiple kind of layers of camera positioning, but what we did not have a lot of was kind of like in the orchestra camera positioning. We didn't have things that were down at the eye level of the musician or below the eye level of the musicians. And that's something that I thought would be a really interesting addition to the tool set. So after doing a number of any number of shows, we started experimenting with different cameras that might give us that type of POV. And we spent years trying all different types out, and we rented cameras and we bought some cameras, and we never were fully satisfied with anything. There were always, some limitations, or the quality of the image wasn't as good, or the fact that it wasn't robotic was an issue. And also, we had a very difficult time finding cameras that would give us picture quality that was sufficient, that we could cut in with the other larger cameras, but also that would give us shading and iris control remotely. Because even though we're an orchestral-based institution, we do a lot of theatrical lighting for our performances. And so, there's lighting level changes throughout. And so when we finally were doing the 4K upgrade, we're still searching for a solution to a camera package that we would be able to deploy kind of at that kind of ground level or below eye level of the musicians on stage to give us that unique POV. And that's when we came across the Panasonics. And we demoed them and demoed some other options, and we're very, very happy with the quality of the Panasonics and the smoothness of the robotic movement, and especially the color control. And so that's, at that point, we made a purchase of six cameras, and we started figuring out ways to integrate them into our existing system. And now that that was just before the pandemic. So that was in October our season begins in basically in October and goes to May. And so we started using the cameras, and we're very happy with everything. And then we, kind of the pandemic hit, and we had to close down. And now we're partially back. We've partially been back for a number of months with a totally different type of performance. There's no orchestra on stage. We're doing very small chamber ensembles, and that are all, spaced from each other, socially distant on stage. And actually, the Panasonics are even more useful than they were before, because now, our robotic cameras, which are in fixed positions, may not get us anything close to the shots that we need of an ensemble that is configured on stage in a way that we've never had one configured on stage before, previously. And so the ability to have these six, because the Panasonics we purposefully kept unmounted to anything, and we actually use mini slider stands as the camera support. So we can put them wherever we want, and we can even move them around during in between pieces during a performance. And so that's actually been a huge benefit to us in the shows that we've started to do since coming back, because we've been able to be very, very flexible. And we're doing 3 musicians, 4 musicians, 2 musicians, 1 musician, 8. I think the largest group that we've done is possibly 8, maybe 10. But also in very unique configurations, partially because they have to be distant from each other. And now we're putting plexiglass screens in between wind and brass players to separate them even further. And also partially because of the nature of the performances. We're performing multiple pieces, and we might need to have, in order to be able to go quickly from one to the next, we might need to have multiple different ensembles preset on stage. And so now we've got, all of these issues that we've never had to deal with before, to this extent at least. And we're, having to face them on a weekly basis.
So having the flexibility with the slider stands then has got to be a huge advantage for this.
Yeah, it's hugely beneficial. And being able to even, so we have six cameras, which we use for our performances. Being able to move them around in between ensembles, even, which we've been doing regularly, is a huge benefit. We wouldn't be able to be producing content that looks like it does without without that.
So one of the things I thought was really interesting on your website and watching the clips that were there, where you were talking about your workflow, is where you start with the stage diagrams, then you have the video storyboards, and then you come up with a shooting script. So sort of two questions. One would be, are you still doing some modified version of that with the smaller ensembles? And then also just, how well did the new Panasonic, PTZs and the controllers fit into that existing workflow, and how much, sort of modification was required?
We're still using that same workflow. Every piece on every program gets a, whatever I'm calling a video storyboard, but every piece on every program gets that treatment. For me, I feel like it's the best as a director. If I'm thinking about what's important during a live multi-camera stream or capture, one of the most important things I can be doing is being certain that the live edit is happening in a way that is super compelling and supports the music and is very, very accurately timed. And the best way to ensure that is to basically do it ahead of time. So to kind of create the edit ahead of time so that I know exactly what it's going to look like. So yeah, we're still doing that. We're still following that workflow. And I don't anticipate stopping anytime soon, because I feel like it's very helpful. And the Panasonic's slotted into that workflow very easily. We've had no issues. I think the main thing that we're exploring now is Panasonic is partnered with a company called Tuning S, I think, and they have a really interesting software and hardware solution, which is adds a lot more options for programming and recalling shots, moving shots, especially, and keyframeable moving shots, and also some hardware which mimics other larger robotic rigs, like elevating pedestals that are programmable and programmable dollies and things like that. So we're exploring those elements now, and how we can kind of even build more into our use of the Panasonics, get more out of them. Our installation is entirely 12G, and that's one of the things that was interesting to us about the Panasonic solution, is that we can get a direct 12G signal right out of the camera, and it's a 12G 4K 5994p signal. And that's what we built our infrastructure around in the first place, was we wanted everything to be 12G. So that was very important to us, partially because we want to keep any type of latency out of our system. And so we're very happy with the responsiveness. We haven't had any issues on that front at all. And because of course it's 12G over fiber, but we're far less than a frame of latency in our system, even with everything that we have to do.
So in terms of the ways that you're doing your sort of live edit in your production now, I assume you're not doing the sort of IMAG in the park thing right now because of social distancing. Is that right?
We're currently not doing our wallcasts.
Okay, the wallcasts, yeah.
But essentially the wallcasts are exactly the same thing that we produce to go onto the wall, is exactly the same thing that we're producing, but is now streaming.
Okay.
It's exactly the same workflow. It's exactly the same assets. It's the same. I mean, the difference is that it says wallcast in the opening animation instead of webcast. But other than that, everything is the same. So what we're doing now is we're still recording. We're still generating everything in 4K, all of the pre-produced content. We're still recording in 4K. We're knocking it down to HD for streaming, but we're still recording 4K masters of everything. And it's the same exact show that would go to the wall that is going to any streaming services now.
Going back to something you were talking about earlier, about having more remote control over different parameters in the cameras and so forth, and controlling the iris and the shading and so forth. So can you talk a little bit about kind of how that works in your system?
It depends on the show. If there was if we were going for a visual effect, like we really wanted, when we cut to this particular instrument, for some reason, we really wanted the image to look drastically different than it previously did. We would do that with presets. Our workflow for shading is, I think, relatively traditional. We have a giant chart, and at the beginning of the season, we go into a lighting look that's like a standard for one of our productions, and quote unquote standard for one of our productions. We put the chart out, and then we match every camera as precisely as we can, and then those presets get saved, and all of that information gets entered into a spreadsheet for all the information for every camera gets entered into a spreadsheet, so that in case anything happens, somebody can recall it or re-enter it manually later if they had to. It also gets saved onto, a SIM card or whatever, some sort of little storage device. So we do that with all of the cameras. We do that for the Panasonics, and we also do that for the Hitachis, which are the larger format cameras that we use. And then during shows, what we're mostly doing is writing irises live. Except shaders like to tweak. And so there's, always going to be something like, oh, I didn't see that particular color of red. I didn't realize that it looked a little bit different on these two cameras. So let me try to fix that while we're in rehearsal or while the show's going on. And so that's it's a constantly evolving thing. And between show to show, he might, end up tweaking something and then apply that to across multiple cameras. And so ideally, by the end of the season, he's got a pretty well-developed kind of look, and then we start all over again the following season from scratch. And that's mostly how it goes. What he'll do during rehearsals is he'll make notes in the shooting script for when there are big lighting changes. And so he knows he's got to get ahead of us, and he's got to be ready for, whatever the lights are going to be really low at this point, or they're going to be really bright. And so he'll make notes for himself of what he'll have to fix in order to keep up with it.
And then how many people do you actually have in your on-site crew, handling all this stuff?
We actually have one person who sits in the audience. We take up one audience seat. He sits in the audience. He's the only person who has his hands on a camera. Everything else is done robotically. And that's because many of the shows that we do include a soloist for at least one of the pieces. And there's no position that gets us like a nice eye level shot of the soloist unless it's from the audience. So for any of those shows, we take up one audience seat, and we put a camera operator there, and he's got his copy of the shooting script also, and he's got his assignments, and he mostly is focusing on the soloist, but since he's there, he might get us some other shots. But that's the only like human operated hands-on camera position. So the way we do it is we use one robotic operator whose job is to program the presets off the shooting script and also to recall the presets. We use another operator whose job is to do what I call live moves, which basically are just anything that I want someone with a joystick to execute rather than a programmed shot, rather than a system to execute. And that can be for any number of reasons. And then we have a shader. And then we have the one guy sitting in the audience. So technically it's 3 camera operators and 1 shader. I direct, and we have a TD. And then we use 2 score readers for our shows. So one person who's following in the score and is cueing me, and then another person who's following along in the score and is cueing the robotic operators.
What are the respective roles and how does the integration work between the Panasonic controllers, and you still use the telemetric system? Is that right?
Yes. Yeah, we actually are using it kind of in a hybrid way currently. We have the telemetrics made an adjustment, made a modification to their system, which will allow us to save presets for the Panasonic cameras inside of the telemetrics system. So we use telemetrics has a part of their system that's called I think the studio control or something like that. And it's basically a touchscreen interface that instead of pressing physical buttons to recall presets, you use a touchscreen interface. And as you can name the presets, you can, make adjustments to timings, you can do all sorts of things. And as you save a preset, it saves a thumbnail. So then when you're recalling them, you're just pressing you're touching the thumbnail to recall the shots. So telemetrics made a modification to their system to allow it to talk to the Panasonic cameras and basically to save presets the same way that we do, and to be able to recall them and everything so that it functions within our existing infrastructure. There's a Panasonic controller at each of the robotic workstations, and our shader also has a Panasonic controller at his workstation. So everybody can either control Hitachi or a Panasonic, all from their own little ecosystem. And it works nicely. Everything plays pretty well together. It's a little bit, it's a different protocol. The Panasonic uses a different protocol than telemetrics does, so it's an additional cable. But other than that, it's a fine system.
Is there anything you just wanted to add that you want people to know about, or anything comes to mind?
No, I think I should say, if you're interested in seeing any of our performances, we are going to be, we're going to start streaming again in January, actually. And we have some more live streams happening in February, actually quite a few for the rest of the season. And our web address is www.nws.edu. And there's links there to all different types of digital offerings and things like that. But yeah, we'd love to get as many people to watch this stuff as we can.
Okay, great. And so those will all be audience-less, live, in-person audience-less, small ensemble performances?
For the moment, yes. Until we learn anything further, we're not planning on having live audiences. And we're just, we're keeping up with all of the information, and we have, everybody wants to have live audiences. Nobody likes playing for an empty concert hall. As much as it makes our job easier sometimes, my job easier sometimes, because I don't have to worry about a camera being in the way of somebody. It's still not the same to, be performing this music and not have an audience there to listen to it. So we really want to have live audiences back, and we're doing everything we can, but at this point, it's obviously not safe. So we're keeping up with all of the information, and we're doing our best. And as soon as it is safe, we'll start inviting audiences back in.